You have a book coming out, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. You think that climate change could be a bigger disaster than COVID. Why is that?
Well, certainly climate change will make entire ecosystems die off. It'll make parts of the world, impossible to live in. And so the actual economic and death toll from climate change will be much, much, much greater than what we have with this pandemic. It's delayed in time, so the current effects aren't as severe. There aren't, 150,000 deaths in the US this year related to climate change. So this is an acute problem, but with a clear solution, and you can go back to normal. Whereas climate change, the scale of the changes required takes decades of invention and decades of scaling out. Perhaps some of the investment and restructuring that various countries do after the pandemic to rebuild their economies can have this as a theme. But, like other important causes, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this also was predictable, and the damage will be very, very large.
And if we don't solve the climate problem, do you believe there will be more pandemics, worse pandemics in the future?
Well, that's not the only thing. You'll have incredible instability because your ability to grow food in large parts of the world will be so diminished that you'll literally have hundreds of millions of migrants, and you won't have a thriving global economy because you will have degraded the ecosystems. And there is no quick fix to that thing, unlike the magic vaccine that's a mere year to 2 years at most to come up with.
The world has changed so much since you and Melinda put out your annual letter, and I wonder what are the other issues out there that you worry are being sidelined because we're so focused on fighting COVID. Where are we taking our eye off the ball?
Yeah, just today I was sending out a letter to other people who've donated to polio eradication and talking to them about how the distraction, which is understandable, has been a huge setback where we thought we were within a couple of years. And so sadly in Africa, there'll be a lot more deaths just from the impact on the health system and how that raises death rates for other diseases way more than the direct effect of COVID itself.
How extreme do you think inequality could get?
Well, inequality between countries is quite extreme. The toughest places in Africa are, you have a hard time surviving and getting enough to eat, and your kids in many locations, the majority, their brain never develops, they grow up stunted, and so the human potential is not there, and you're caught in a trap of instability and malnutrition. We're down to from 10% to 5% of children dying before the age of 5. Now that'll go back up maybe to 6 or 7%, but give us 3 or 4 years, we'll get back on track with that if it hasn't ended the kind of generosity and funding of innovation that's been key to that progress.
Not every billionaire is as generous as you, though, despite your urgings. What are some other ways you think we could narrow the inequality gap? How would you feel about a return to a wealth tax that could combat that?
I've got on my website a lot of ideas for collecting more taxes from the rich that I don't specifically involve a wealth tax because I think there are challenges with that. But anyway, we can have a more progressive tax system without killing the wonderful risk-taking entrepreneurialism in this country. You can have tax systems that, in my personal opinion, go too far, but we're not at that limit, particularly for capital gains type income. So yes, governments, if they realize that money isn't free, which macroeconomic conditions are confusing some people about that, at least temporarily, we will need taxes to make up for the the resources, because this pandemic, even just within the country, whether it's low-income families, minority families, kids in the inner city, it sadly has exacerbated almost all the inequality in the society. If you're in a suburban school or private school, the online thing is actually not doing all that badly. Whereas if you're a young kid in the inner city, it's not accessible.
I'm not sure what's more terrifying, schools reopening or schools not reopening. I'm in a state where my schools aren't reopening. Should schools reopen right now? And if they don't, is that a year of lost learning for our children?
For kids up through even 8th grade, the data suggests that if you make sure that you give the elderly teachers or teachers who live in a multi-generational household and therefore necessarily exposed to elderly people, if you figure out how to, have them work at the remote high school level and bring in younger teachers without those risks, I do think there's a huge benefit for the younger people. So we ought to be talking more about some age distinctions here. In places with the heavy epidemic, which sadly in the U.S. is a lot of places, high school and college are not going to get organized enough, and the disease transmission rate is much higher as you get up, past, say, 14 or 15. So, it's everybody's scrambling because this is all being done so much at the last minute, where some people, thought the cases wouldn't be raging at this point and didn't really help us think it through.
Well, and this shift to remote work and school is dramatically reshaping companies and families. And I wonder how you see that having a lasting impact on society.
Well, there are great things like telemedicine that people have been open-minded to because they've kind of been forced into it. And there's ways to shape that for lower cost and higher quality. The notion broadly of how many office workers need to go into the office, which weeks, which days, how many hours, that's going to get a really big rethink business by business. And you might reduce the total commercial space needed pretty dramatically and take some pressure off of these inner city cores where the rents and traffic are very problematic. And so, we're not going to do as much business travel, I don't think, because people have been forced to learn Zoom and Teams, and the R&D on those things is going to make them way better, even just a year from now than they are right now.
I've been following how Melinda has been talking about the impact this is having on women and families. She's been very outspoken about how you and her have navigated work-family life. And I'm curious how you're navigating this time. There's this feeling in the home of whose job is more important, mom's or dad's. How do you answer that question?
Well, I'm very good at doing the dishes. I'm not as good at preparing the food. So hopefully some specialization kicks in there. Our kids are older, so we're really lucky. We've actually gotten more time with them than we would have under normal circumstances. And obviously, we have a lot of room in our house and a great internet connection. So, our case is atypically nice, and I've tried to make sure it's not loading her, but I think it's great she's speaking out, because if you're a single parent, if you're in a small space, this is a hugely difficult thing, and it's even hard to measure how tough it's been for those without what we're lucky to have.